So we are reacting and analyzing the debate between COOLEY and TILLY. And if you haven't watched the debate yet, I can assure you that it was really funny because both of them were kind of missing the points they were making. Predominantly COOLEY, he was pretty much consistently missing the points TILLY was trying to make. And I have nothing against COOLEY, but in this debate, he really didn't perform as well. But let's just react to the very first point.
Do you believe that morality is subjective?
No, I believe that there are certain rights that we ground in social contractarianism, which is outside of and or mind independent. So for example, as I outlined in my opening speech, feminists do a couple of things. The first thing they might do is enforce objective rights that are basically mind independent logical phenomena that any rational agent would agree helps people live and coexist in society without dominating one another. So that's an objective thing, for example, the right to life. What I would say is subjective, i.e. like preference-based, are fighting against certain cultural norms that feminists view as negative. And that doesn't require an enforcement class.
Okay, well, if you say that you don't believe in subjective morality, what you're doing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that you believe in objective morality and it's objective because it's mind independent, but you just said that you rely on logic to create some type of right where it's objective. That really doesn't make any sense. So I'll just ask you a question. If it's the case that you think that you have this right in your mind, right? Like you gave the Mike Tyson example. For example, right? If I'm around Mike Tyson, if I walk around Mike Tyson and in his prime, I think that I can defeat him now, but in his prime, just being honest here, in his prime, if I walked around Mike Tyson, and he was like, "Cooley, I don't want you speaking, no more talking." Well, we would have to tussle. Right? And it's a high probability that Mike Tyson is going to whoop me real bad. And basically, Mike Tyson would hold, I don't have any right to speak. I can speak, or I can suffer the consequences of being punched in the mouth by Mike Tyson. So I don't really have this right to speak without experiencing any consequences. And I think for myself as an individual, because I'm not a beta, I would continue to speak and just take the butt whooping. But most men would probably just concede and never speak. They'll give up all their rights, never speak, and just concede to Mike Tyson. So with that being said, how you're trying to like map morality and say that if you're not mapping morality can only be mind independent if it's mapping on divine command like a god. But if you're just mapping it on to logic and reason and stuff like that, well, it's good for people to to have life. Well, some people don't think that. And also, if you kill my family, well, it's a high probability that I'm going after your family. So you're not really like mapping this onto anything. You're just like saying words, but it doesn't really hold any weight. How do you ground morality? Please explain.
Right, I'll ask you a really simple question then, which is 2 + 2 4, whether or not you are on Mars or on Earth? Like, let's say every human being disappears from society. Is 2 + 2 still 4?
That is true.
Right. So that's where I ground rights. Do you see how, like...
Okay, so that is math. Okay, got it. What you just did was, so what you're doing is you're using a transcendental argument to say that, well, mapping rights onto transcendental categories. Transcendental categories is logic, logic and reason, things that we can't objectively prove, right? We can't objectively prove these things, but we still live everyday life. Real quick, we live I already answered your question. We live every day. What you're doing is you're using a transcendental category to prove rights, but you're not demonstrating it properly because it can't be demonstrated. So my question is, how do you ground your morality if it's objective? Where is it grounded in? It's not grounded in logic.
A lot to unpack here, but COOLEY kind of missed what TILLY was describing here, because he said that
you rely on logic to create some type of right where it's objective. That really doesn't make any sense.
but it very much does make sense. Let's take, for example, a bridge. Bridges obviously didn't exist all the time. So at some point, a human being had a thought of this thing that should connect two land plates with each other. The thought of that bridge and the will to have that was subjective at first, but given the purpose of a bridge and the requirements it needs to build a bridge, these requirements obviously being based on math and physics, we can now objectively assess if a bridge is correctly built or not. Now let's imagine there was this particular formula that would automatically lead to a bridge. This formula would then be mind independent, and Tilly is basically extrapolating that onto society. But on the last point, Tilly says she grounds these things like math is grounded objectively.
Like, let's say every human being disappears from society. Is 2 + 2 still 4?
That is true.
Right. So that's where I ground rights.
And that is just false. I think her point was that she maps these social contracts on the same common sense as math is grounded. Like 2 + 2 is 4. If we want to have a society where we don't kill each other, since we all think or feel killing is bad, we shouldn't kill each other. So it's the same kind of deduction you make as a rational agent to fulfill the social contract. You see, there's a difference when it comes to objectively, because if something is, for instance, universally objectively true, like math, like she said, if tomorrow every single human being would disappear from planet Earth, 2 + 2 would still be 4. And that's just the fundamental law of nature we discovered essentially. Whereas if we use the same example of tomorrow every single human being disappears, would lying, stealing, or cursing still be objectively bad? Well, it just begs the question why, if no humans exist.
So I say that rights are the, hold on, I wrote the definition down myself. It's essentially the minimal set of claims that each rational agent has to be able to make over themselves and over the world in order for a social contract to be possible, i.e. mutually agreeing and binding themselves to a contract to enter society.
Okay, got it. So then rights is a construction of the mind.
No, because rights are a set of constraints that any rational agent would agree to put on themselves when they choose to enter society. Just like how maths, there's like obviously the debate about whether or not.
Yeah, but it's subjective. We give ourselves these rights, is what you're saying.
No, that's not what I say. I say that rights are to do with the extent to which we follow any kind of reason, rationality insofar as it would require us to enter society. So it's like, for example, mathematical theorems or like Nash's equilibrium, these types of things are just like basic fundamentals about the world that sure we use to discover it through our mind, but they're not invented.
Okay, so it's not invented, but we can choose to discover it through our mind. But
that's right.
So once again, can you touch a right?
No.
Okay, so you cannot touch a right, but you have rights. And if you can't touch it, it's not in the physical world, then it would only be in the mind, right?
Well, you also have maths.
So what Tilly is trying to explain to COOLEY, which COOLEY misses, is that the social contract she's talking about is not just subjective, it's grounded by logic. But COOLEY is right when he says, well, rights are constructed by the mind, because they are indeed constructed by the mind. If I punch one of you guys, right, you would feel pain. And that pain you feel, it's objectively true that you feel that pain. So we discovered, as a collective of human beings, that we observe pain and suffering as bad. If that is the case, we all for a fact know that if we had the choice to choose a world where we all just suffer or we all have, joy and pleasure, the vast majority of human beings would pick the world full of joy. Therefore, any rational human being in a society would make social contracts possible to create a society where we live and fulfill that maximum joy and minimum suffrage. And thus we create duties and rights. And COOLEY is technically right if he says, well, these things are all in our mind. Yes, the interpretation we have with pain, that it's bad, is in our mind, but we didn't really choose so. it just so makes sense to create a society where we live in least amount of pain and suffrage, because that is essentially the purpose we gave to society. I think what Tilly was kind of describing are the duties and not rights, particularly because rights are entitlements, because entitlements are sort of a choice you have. For instance, abortion. To abort your child, it's a choice you can do, but you also have the choice not to. I don't have the choice to not steal. You know, I'm capable of it, but under the social contract, I don't have that choice. And, you know, duties are duties, but nonetheless, we as human beings have the duty to respect so and such rights.
But my question for you is, you're saying something, but you're not really demonstrating it. How can you ground a right, something that you construct in your mind? So, for example, if I say that, me as an individual, well, I have, just like the Mike Tyson example, we can use many different examples, right? Me as an individual, I go to Afghanistan, right? And I say that, well, I have the right to do this. They're gonna be like, I can think and say it out loud, but if they take the right from me, I don't actually have the right. So what I'm saying is, all of these things, you don't have it. All of these things need to be
You don't possess it because it's not being realized, but you still have the right.
You don't possess it, but you still have it. It's just not realized. I think she just can't really explain how she would enforce these rights or social contracts without forced doctrine. Because if you're in a society where you don't have that right, you're still capable of it, but if you face consequences for speaking, that literally means you don't have that right. Just like in Western countries, you may be capable of stealing or, for example, faking a document. That doesn't mean you have that right, because you would still face consequences for doing so.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. You can think that women have the right to vote, right? You can think that. But prior to the 19th Amendment, women did not have the right to vote. So it can be women prior to the 19th Amendment. They could actually think that they had the right to vote. But did they actually have the right to vote?
Wait,
they
real
only
quick,
had it after the 19th Amendment.
Let me try to clear this up so we don't get stuck on this, okay? Okay, also, I don't do formal philosophy, so I might suck at this, okay? So I think the argument is, her argument is that insofar as any social contract can possibly exist, any rational mind would conceive of or construct rights to make said social contract work. Much the same that for anybody to do math, every reasonable, rational mind would agree that 1 + 1 = 2. So in a world where women can't vote, the statement wouldn't, that I imagine she would say, it wouldn't be that like, women didn't have the right. She would say that women didn't have a social contract.
But here's where you get to a point where you can't really make statements about that is right or wrong. Since rights like women should be able to vote or should be able to abort or men should have the right to not go to war are pretty much subjective, since these things wouldn't interfere with the purpose of a society being fulfilled. Just like different bridge shapes or sizes or designs don't interfere with the purpose of a bridge.
So like, the disagreement.
I get how she's explaining it, but my question is, which she still didn't answer, how can it be enforced?
Okay.
How are you going to enforce the thing that you have in your mind? That's my question.
Right. So here's what I'll do. I'll tackle the internal critique. So what I would say is that even if men historically hold certain positions, the internal critique doesn't hold, because saying like the weaker group appealing to the stronger group to enforce rights that exist absent them mind independently. That is how all rights movements work. So this would be like saying like, okay, workers appealing to their bosses for a weekend demonstrates that workers' rights movements fall in on themselves. Or like slaves appealing to enslavers for freedom proves something about the nature of the races themselves and why one should subordinate themselves to the other.
Once again, how can women collectively enforce their own rights? Yes or no?
No one can collectively enforce their own rights.
Okay, Cooley just completely dismisses the point she made about the internal critique here, but the point he's trying to make is right. He's not wrong when he says, well, they're not able to enforce these rights without the monopoly on force. But he's not explaining it to her, he's just saying the points he's making. Because at the end of the day, Destiny explained it pretty well, that, well, in Afghanistan, women just didn't have a social contract. But it just begs the question, why and who decides who has a social contract or not? Or i.e., who decides which social contracts or how social contracts get realized or not. And that's the question COOLEY is trying to argue, that you cannot enforce your social contract, i.e. rights, if you don't have force. Even if you're right and women, for instance, should be able to vote, that doesn't mean they have that right. And he's completely right about that, because that's the point Tilly is missing essentially. She describes how these things are grounded and why these things should be realized, but she's not describing how they are realized. The example Tilly made with the races, well, it doesn't prove anything about the races itself, it just proves the dynamic these races had. Back in the day when slavery happened, you just had a majority of white people who wanted these people to be enslaved and a minority of black people who refused to want to be enslaved. Obviously, that slavery still happened just proves that the majority group can essentially dictate the rights of the minority. But this is not always the case. It just describes that it is one of the important key factors when it comes to who dictates rights. And that is indeed forced doctrine.
So I think we're having a disagreement on subjective and objective, where we're slicing in like material and immaterial or something as well. So I think when Tilly is saying objective, what she's saying is that if there's some desirable end state for society to exist, then there's going to be some necessary lines of argumentation that every rational being will agree with. So if we believe that people having agency in society is good and everybody has a rational mind, we can all do deduction and all that, that there are going to be some arguments that objectively must be true and unchanging from person to person in order to satisfy said end condition. Not that it necessarily is like mind independent or comes from God or anything like that, I believe is what Tilly's saying, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So, okay, yeah. And then, okay, so then I'm not actually 100% sure. So, no Fugazi, when you're arguing against her saying, well, that's subjective because some people can take it, what the response here is not that like somebody else taking it doesn't prove that it's not
the taking. I'm arguing that from using her definition of objective morality, since she's not appealing to God, she's appealing. So when I'm thinking of objective means that it's mind independent, not mind dependent.
And this is probably the reason why COOLEY couldn't even grasp what Tilly was trying to explain, because he thinks of objective as of like math, like universally objective. And yeah, it makes sense that women having the right to abort cannot be universally objectively true, independent of human beings.
So if it's mind dependent and she's utilizing logic and reason, then so objective means mind independent, but she's depending on the mind because she's utilizing logic and reason. And therefore, when she's saying that, well, someone can utilize logic and reason, but they can do something that is bad and they can also do something that is good. So where is it objectively good? Where are you grounding your objectively good moral standard and your objectively bad moral standard?
I think the objective is just, objectively means just, and again, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, I think objectively here just means it's like logically satisfying an end condition. So if you have some ZFC, some set of like math axioms, you would say that like 1 + 1 = 2. This is an objectively true statement because given some set of axioms, you know, this is what we come up with, is 1 + 1 = 2. If you're looking at a social arrangement where there's a social contract where people all have some maximum level of agency, they can choose to do things or whatever, right? If this is the case, then that means that there's going to be some things that you have to agree on in terms of a lot, like not killing, not murder, like not murdering.
Yeah. So here's my argument. It's very simple. Objective means mind independent. If we are appealing to a collection of people to agree on things, like if we're appealing to numbers, we say this is bad, right? Well, a grape is bad. A collection of people can say, yes, grape is bad. Okay, but what if a collection of people say, well, grape is actually good? Then does that mean that it's right?
So again, he's arguing from a standpoint where he's talking about universally objective morality, right? But under the worldview of Tilly, the people who grape or think grape is good would objectively be wrong, because since graping other human beings increases the human suffrage, We now for sure know that graping doesn't fulfill the purpose of a society. And the people who think that graping is good, they think it's good because it doesn't directly increase their own suffrage. Because if you then ask those people, so it's okay if I grape your mom, they'll probably say no. And even if they think that it's okay if I grape their own mom and they have nothing against that, right? That would still not change the fact that it's indeed objectively not correct to do. But objectively only under the premise that it doesn't serve the purpose of a society. And throughout the whole debate, it was just about this topic that they just misunderstood each other. But I hope you guys still enjoyed. Leave a like if you did, and see you next time.